Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you were taught about money was designed to keep you poor, not by accident, not by bad luck, but by a system that rewards those who understand the game and quietly punishes those who don't. This is the uncomfortable truth behind why the rich are getting richer. A truth most people never hear because traditional education doesn't teach it. Schools teach you how to work for money, but never how to make money work for you. And while the middle class is told to save more, work harder, play it safe, the wealthy are using debt, taxes, and financial strategy as tools, almost like cheat codes, to build wealth faster than ever. So the real question isn't why are the rich getting richer? It's why are so many people stuck playing a game they don't even know the rules of? In this book, Robert Kiyosaki rips back the curtain and exposes the mechanics of money, the stuff hidden behind accounting terms, the tax code, and the financial moves the wealthy make quietly while everyone else plays defense. He shows why savers are losing ground, why crashes are opportunities, and how understanding financial education, the real kind, can change your entire future. This isn't just a summary of a book. It's a wake-up call, one that might reshape how you think about your job, your income, your taxes, and your financial destiny. Because once you learn what the rich actually know, you can't unlearn it. And that's when everything changes. Chapter 1 opens with one of the most common questions people ask Robert Kiyosaki. What should I do with my money? Kiyosaki explains that this question exposes a deeper problem. Most people have never received real financial education. Schools prepare students to become employees, not investors, and as a result, the majority of adults do not understand how money actually works in the real world. Kiyosaki contrasts two mindsets: the traditional advice given to the middle class versus the strategic approach taken by the rich. The middle class is taught to save money, get out of debt, and invest in a 401k. While this sounds responsible, he argues that this strategy no longer works in today's financial environment. Inflation erodes savings, taxes take a large portion of earned income, and retirement accounts expose people to market volatility while offering little control. By comparison, the rich ask a different question: how can I use money and the tax code to build more wealth? Instead of relying on earned income, they focus on passive income, business income, and investment structures that reduce taxes and increase cash flow. The wealthy understand that financial systems reward those who use debt productively and penalize those who fear it. A key point Kiyosaki introduces is the cash flow quadrant: E, employee; S, self-employed; B, business owner; I, investor. Most people operate in the E and S quadrants, where income is taxed the highest. The rich focus on the B and I quadrants, where income can be taxed the least and wealth can grow the fastest. Kiyosaki emphasizes that financial advice should be different depending on which quadrant a person wants to operate in. Asking "what should I do with my money?" is incomplete if you do not understand where your money comes from and the tax implications tied to it. Another major concept in this chapter is the idea that the rich use financial education as leverage. They learn accounting, investing, and the tax advantages built into the system. These skills allow them to grow wealth even during economic downturns. Meanwhile, people without financial knowledge rely on job security, which is increasingly unstable. Kiyosaki also highlights the role of government incentives. The tax code is not primarily designed to punish people. It is designed to reward behaviors that support the economy, such as building businesses, creating jobs, and investing in real estate. The rich take advantage of these incentives because they understand them. The middle class does not, and ends up paying the highest share of taxes. Chapter 1 concludes with a challenge. Real financial education begins when you learn how to make decisions like the B and I quadrants, not like traditional employees. Until people understand the true rules of money, taxes, debt, income types, and financial statements, they will continue asking the wrong question and getting the wrong results. In Chapter 2, Robert Kiyosaki expands on one of his well-known statements: savers are losers. He clarifies that the phrase is not an insult to people who save money, but a warning about how the modern financial system works. The chapter explains why traditional saving strategies fail in today's economy and why the rules of money have changed dramatically. Kiyosaki begins by addressing a fundamental shift. Governments print money, and central banks manipulate monetary policy. As more currency enters circulation, the value of existing money decreases. This process, inflation, destroys the purchasing power of savings over time. While people think they are being responsible by saving cash, inflation quietly reduces its value every year. He contrasts this with past generations. Decades ago, saving money in a bank account was rewarded with high interest rates. Today, interest rates are low, and in many cases, the return on savings does not even keep up with inflation. When taxes on interest earnings are added, savers often lose money in real terms. Kiyosaki emphasizes that the financial system is designed in ways most people do not understand. Governments need inflation because it reduces the real value of national debt. Meanwhile, banks need depositors' money so they can lend it out at higher rates. Savers unknowingly support the banking system while receiving minimal return. The chapter then explains the difference between good debt and bad debt. Most people avoid all debt because they were taught that debt is dangerous. The wealthy do the opposite. They use good debt to acquire assets that generate cash flow. Instead of using savings to buy assets, they use borrowed money, allowing them to leverage inflation in their favor. When inflation rises, the value of their debt decreases over time, while the assets they purchased often appreciate. Kiyosaki also highlights the role of financial education. People are encouraged to save money because they do not understand investing, taxes, or asset building. Savings appear safe, simple, and predictable, but this sense of safety is misleading. Inflation, taxes, and low interest rates make traditional saving one of the least effective wealth building strategies. He provides an example using the cash flow quadrant. Employees and self-employed individuals E and S quadrants earn taxed income and often rely on savings for security. Business owners and investors B and I quadrants use financial tools, including debt, to grow wealth. Savers live in a defensive financial position, while the rich play offense. The chapter concludes by emphasizing that the rules of money have changed, but most people still rely on outdated advice. To move forward financially, individuals must understand how money is created, how inflation works, and why saving is no longer a wealth-building strategy. The real solution is learning how to acquire assets that produce income and outpace inflation. Chapter 3 explains one of Robert Kiyosaki's most controversial ideas. The tax system is designed to benefit the rich, not because of corruption, but because of incentives built directly into the law. Kiyosaki shows how taxes affect each income group differently and why understanding the tax code is a core part of financial education. He begins with the history of income tax. Taxes were originally created to target the wealthy, but eventually expanded to include the middle class. Today, employees and self-employed workers pay the highest percentage of taxes because their income is classified as earned income, the most heavily taxed type. Meanwhile, the rich structure their income differently, using business and investment systems that legally reduce their tax burden. A key concept in this chapter is the cash flow quadrant. E employee, earned income, highest taxes, least control. S self-employed, slightly more control, still highly taxed. B business owner, uses corporate structures to reduce taxes. 1 investor, receives passive income, taxed the lowest. Kiyosaki stresses that people in the E and S quadrants believe taxes are an unavoidable burden. They often think working harder equals earning more. But working harder in these quadrants typically means moving into a higher tax bracket, leaving the worker with less net income. The rich avoid this trap by earning income from the B and I quadrants. Kiyosaki then explains how the tax code is a book of incentives. Governments use tax benefits to encourage specific economic activities, such as building housing, developing energy projects, or creating jobs. Business owners and investors participate in these activities, so they receive tax rewards. In contrast, employees do not generate these benefits for society, so they do not receive tax incentives. One of the most important mechanisms discussed is depreciation. Investors in real estate or business assets receive depreciation deductions, which reduce taxable income even when the asset is increasing in value. Combined with cash flow generated from the asset, this produces a powerful wealth-building effect. Employees do not have access to this advantage. Kiyosaki also highlights the difference between using debt versus using personal income. The rich acquire assets using borrowed money, then use the income produced by those assets to pay off the debt. Because debt is not taxed and asset income is often taxed lightly, the rich accelerate wealth while legally reducing taxes. The chapter emphasizes that tax laws are not written to punish people. They are written to guide economic behavior. The rich study these laws, hire advisors, and build systems around these incentives. People without financial education assume taxes are fixed and cannot be changed, which keeps them in a financial disadvantage. Kiyosaki concludes that understanding taxes is a fundamental part of real financial education. Until individuals learn how the tax code rewards business owners and investors and penalizes earned income, they cannot fully transition from the left side of the cash flow quadrant to the right side. Chapter 4 focuses on a core principle in Robert Kiyosaki's financial philosophy. Mistakes are essential for developing real financial intelligence. In contrast, traditional education treats mistakes as failures, leading most people to avoid risk, avoid experimentation, and avoid opportunities to learn through action. The rich, however, view mistakes as data, information that helps them improve financial judgment and build wealth. Over time, Kiyosaki opens the chapter by comparing the school system to the real world. In school, students are trained to memorize information, avoid errors, and follow instructions. Success is measured by correct answers and compliance, but money does not operate in this environment. Financial success requires decision-making under uncertainty, adapting to change, and learning through trial and error. The rich embrace mistakes because the feedback helps them understand markets, investments, and business operations more accurately. A major concept introduced is the distinction between intellectual learning and experiential learning. Intellectual learning, reading books, attending classes, or listening to advisors, provides theory. Experiential learning, executing deals, managing assets, and facing real outcomes, develops judgment. Kiyosaki argues that the rich rely heavily on experiential learning because financial intelligence grows from hands-on practice. This kind of learning cannot be obtained from a classroom or from simply having a job. He also explains how fear of mistakes keeps the middle class trapped in the E and S quadrants. Employees and self-employed individuals rely on job security and predictable income. Their financial strategy focuses on minimizing mistakes, which leads to conservative decisions such as saving cash, avoiding debt, and investing only in retirement plans. These strategies feel safe but often result in slow or limited financial growth. By contrast, individuals in the B and I quadrants must take calculated risks, manage uncertainty, and accept responsibility for their decisions. Kiyosaki emphasizes that mistakes become powerful when paired with financial statements. Business owners and investors use income statements, balance sheets, and cash flow reports to analyze outcomes. When a decision goes wrong, they study the numbers to understand what happened, then adjust the system. This approach transforms mistakes into financial intelligence. Employees, however, rarely interact with financial statements, so they lack the tools to interpret mistakes productively. The chapter also highlights the role of mentorship. The rich typically surround themselves with accountants, attorneys, advisors, and experienced entrepreneurs who help them learn from mistakes more efficiently. These relationships accelerate learning and reduce the cost of errors. People without such support systems often fear mistakes because they bear the full consequences alone. Kiyosaki concludes that wealth grows through cycles of action, error, analysis, and improvement. Mistakes reveal weaknesses in knowledge, systems, or assumptions. When handled correctly, they increase confidence and competence to qualities necessary for success in the B and I quadrants. Avoiding mistakes may feel safe, but it restricts the financial learning that creates long-term wealth. Chapter 5 explains a central idea in Robert Kiyosaki's financial philosophy. Market crashes are not disasters for the rich, they are opportunities. The reason is not luck or timing. It is financial education, preparation, and the ability to act when assets temporarily fall below their real value. Kiyosaki argues that understanding market cycles is a fundamental part of becoming financially intelligent. The chapter begins with the observation that most people fear market crashes because they associate them with job loss, declining retirement accounts, and economic instability. This reaction is common among individuals in the employee and as self-employed quadrants, who typically rely on earned income and passive investment vehicles they do not control. When markets drop, their wealth and security decline simultaneously. Kiyosaki contrasts this with the mindset of the B business owner and I investor quadrants. These groups prepare for downturns by holding liquidity, maintaining access to credit, and understanding asset valuation. They recognize that crashes reset prices and make high-quality assets affordable. As a result, they often accumulate significant wealth by purchasing undervalued real estate, stocks, businesses, and commodities during downturns. A major theme of the chapter is the concept of market cycles. Kiyosaki stresses that crashes are not rare or unpredictable. They are part of a repeating pattern driven by economic behavior, government policies, and financial system design. Because crashes are inevitable, the wealthy position themselves strategically rather than emotionally. They study macroeconomic trends, interest rates, and debt cycles to anticipate opportunities rather than react with fear. Kiyosaki also explains how debt magnifies opportunities during crashes. When asset prices fall, the ability to borrow money becomes a powerful tool. The rich use good debt to acquire assets at discounted prices, then benefit when markets recover. The middle class typically cannot do this because they depend on personal savings and often lack the credit capacity or financial knowledge to evaluate deals during volatile periods. A key section of the chapter addresses retirement accounts. Many people rely on 401k plans, mutual funds, and long-term stock holdings. During crashes, these portfolios drop in value, but investors have little control over decisions made by fund managers. Kiyosaki argues that relying on these accounts exposes individuals to market risk without providing them with the knowledge to respond effectively. In contrast, active investors use crashes to increase long-term cash flow and tax advantages. The chapter also emphasizes the role of financial education in navigating downturns. Those with strong financial skills understand how to assess cash flow, evaluate distressed assets, identify mispriced opportunities, and negotiate during turbulent markets. Crashes highlight the difference between people who understand financial statements and those who depend on external advisors. Kiyosaki concludes that wealth is often created during market corrections. Crashes separate those who understand financial cycles from those who rely on traditional advice. The rich position themselves to acquire assets, while the average person focuses on avoiding losses. Chapter 6 centers on one of Robert Kiyosaki's most important and misunderstood concepts. The rich become richer because they use debt strategically, while the poor and middle class become financially stressed because they use debt improperly. The chapter explains the structural differences between good debt and bad debt, why the rich rely on leverage, and how financial education determines the outcome of borrowing. Kiyosaki begins by addressing a common belief: all debt is dangerous. He argues that this perspective is rooted in traditional education, which teaches people to avoid risk, follow predictable career paths, and seek financial safety. Because of this mindset, most individuals only encounter consumer debt, credit cards, car loans, and personal loans which drain income instead of building wealth. This is what he calls bad debt. The rich, however, focus on productive debt or good debt. Good debt is borrowed money used to acquire assets that produce cash flow, appreciate over time, or provide tax advantages. Examples include debt used to purchase investment real estate, expand a business, or acquire income-producing assets. In these cases, the asset, not the borrower's paycheck, repays the loan. A major framework discussed in this chapter is the cash flow quadrant. Individuals in the E-employee and S self-employed quadrants typically rely on earned income and view debt as a liability. Individuals in the B business owner and I investor quadrants view debt as leverage, a tool that multiplies returns and accelerates wealth building. Kiyosaki explains how tax laws reinforce these differences. Investors and business owners often receive interest deductions, depreciation benefits, and capital gains advantages features unavailable to employees. These incentives encourage the use of debt for productive purposes. For the middle class, interest on consumer loans offers no comparable benefit. This creates a structural gap in financial outcomes between those who understand debt and those who avoid it entirely. The chapter also addresses the relationship between debt and inflation. Because governments continuously print money, inflation erodes the value of currency over time. For borrowers using good debt, inflation becomes an advantage. The real value of their debt decreases each year, while the cash flow or asset value generated from the borrowed money often increases. This dynamic allows the rich to grow wealth even in inflationary environments. Kiyosaki highlights that using debt effectively requires financial literacy, particularly in accounting and cash flow analysis. Business owners and investors study financial statements to determine whether an asset can service its own debt. They use numbers, not emotions, to evaluate opportunities. Most employees never receive training in reading financial statements, which limits their ability to use debt productively. Another key point is risk management. The rich do not take blind risks. They build systems, teams, and structures around their use of debt. Accountants, lawyers, bankers, and advisors help them manage liabilities responsibly. People without these systems often fear debt because they carry the risk entirely on their own. The chapter concludes by stating that debt is neither good nor bad by nature. Its impact depends on financial education, strategy, and the quadrant in which a person operates. To move toward financial freedom, individuals must learn how to use debt to acquire assets rather than avoid debt altogether. Chapter 7 focuses on defining what real financial education is not, because most people misunderstand the term. Robert Kiyosaki explains that many assume financial education means getting good grades, earning degrees, or learning how to save money responsibly. In reality, these activities do not teach the skills required to build wealth. The chapter clarifies the misconceptions that keep people financially stuck, especially those in the employee and self-employed S quadrants. Kiyosaki begins by emphasizing that traditional schooling does not provide financial education. Schools teach academic subjects, math, science, reading, but not how to interpret financial statements, evaluate investments, or understand taxes. Students graduate with technical skills but lack knowledge about cash flow, debt structure, asset management, and the financial system. As a result, even highly educated professionals often struggle with money. One major misconception Kiyosaki highlights is the belief that high income equals financial intelligence. Many people with strong salaries, doctors, lawyers, engineers, remain financially insecure because they depend entirely on earned income. They often accumulate liabilities, pay high taxes, and rely on savings or retirement plans. Their income level disguises the fact that they lack the skills needed to operate in the business owner B and investor I quadrants. Another false assumption is that saving money and investing in a 401k constitute financial education. Kiyosaki argues that these strategies were designed for people who do not understand money and need a default system. Saving exposes individuals to inflation risk, while retirement accounts place their financial future in the hands of fund managers. These tools do not teach people how to analyze deals, build passive income, or use tax incentives. Kiyosaki also explains that financial education is not about predicting markets. Many individuals think investing means following stock tips, watching news reports, or reacting to economic headlines. The rich focus instead on financial fundamentals, income statements, balance sheets, taxes, and debt structures. Real financial education is rooted in numbers, not speculation. A key concept in this chapter is that financial education is not the same as professional training. People often believe acquiring career skills, medical degrees, engineering licenses. Business diplomas automatically leads to financial success. Kiyosaki argues that professional skills create income, but financial skills determine what happens to that income after it is earned. Without understanding how money flows through assets and liabilities, even high earners can experience financial stress. The chapter also addresses the misconception that being debt-free equals being financially educated. While the middle class views debt avoidance as responsible behavior, the rich understand how to use debt to acquire cash flow generating assets. Avoiding all debt limits financial growth and reflects a lack of literacy about leverage. Kiyosaki concludes by defining what real financial education is: the ability to read and interpret financial statements, understand tax strategies, leverage debt, build and acquire assets, and operate within the B and I quadrants. Without these skills, people remain dependent on traditional advice and vulnerable to economic changes. Chapter 8 addresses one of the core problems in modern society. Most people are financially illiterate, even if they appear successful or educated. Robert Kiyosaki explains that financial illiteracy is not about intelligence. It is about lacking the ability to understand and use financial statements, tax systems, and investment structures. Without these skills, individuals become dependent on employers, financial advisors, and government programs, leaving them vulnerable to economic shifts. Kiyosaki begins by defining financial illiteracy as the inability to understand the relationship between the income statement and the balance sheet. These two documents reveal how money enters, flows through, and exits a person's financial life. People who do not understand these statements often confuse assets with liabilities, misinterpret debt, and fail to assess whether their financial decisions generate cash flow or destroy it. This misunderstanding is a major reason why the middle class struggles financially. Despite working hard, the chapter stresses that high academic education does not prevent financial illiteracy. Many professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers earn strong incomes but remain in financial distress because they rely solely on earned income and accumulate liabilities disguised as assets. Kiyosaki notes that income is not the problem. The inability to manage cash flow is. Without financial literacy, higher income often leads to higher spending, more debt, and greater tax exposure. A central point in Chapter 8 is the distinction between good expenses and bad expenses. Financially literate individuals invest in education, systems, advisors, and assets that improve their financial intelligence or cash flow. Illiterate individuals devote most of their expenses to consumer goods, lifestyle costs, and liabilities that do not produce returns. The rich continuously reinvest in expanding financial knowledge because literacy directly affects decision quality. Kiyosaki also discusses the role of tax literacy. The financially illiterate do not understand how tax brackets, deductions, depreciation, and incentives work. They assume taxes are fixed and unavoidable. Meanwhile, financially literate individuals study the tax code, structure their income through businesses or investments, and use legal incentives to minimize taxes. Understanding taxes is fundamental because taxes are often a person's largest lifetime expense. Debt literacy is another major component. Those who are financially illiterate treat all debt as negative and avoid it completely. This prevents them from leveraging good debt to acquire income-generating assets. The rich understand the mechanics of debt, interest rates, amortization, and cash flow, enabling them to use other people's money to grow wealth. Illiteracy in this area forces the middle class to rely only on their own labor and savings. The chapter also highlights that financial illiteracy leads people to rely on external authorities, financial planners, banks, fund managers without understanding whether the products being offered support their goals. This dependency results in individuals handing control of their financial future to others. Kiyosaki concludes that financial literacy is not optional in today's economy. Understanding financial statements, taxes, debt, and cash flow is essential for transitioning from the E and S quadrants to the B and I quadrants. Without these skills, people remain financially vulnerable regardless of income level. Chapter 9 explains why Robert Kiyosaki repeatedly uses the board game Monopoly as a model for understanding how real wealth is built. The point of the chapter is not about entertainment. It is about recognizing that the financial strategies used by the rich mirror the core mechanics of the game: acquiring assets, increasing cash flow, and using strategic leverage to scale wealth. Kiyosaki begins by explaining that monopoly teaches the foundational rule of wealth. The person who controls the most income-producing assets wins in the game. These assets are properties. In the real world, they can be real estate, businesses, or investments that generate ongoing cash flow. The simplicity of monopoly reflects a truth about money. Wealth depends far more on asset ownership than on earned income. A key comparison in this chapter is the difference in focus between the middle class and the rich. The middle class focuses on income, salaries, wages, and job security. The rich focus on acquiring assets, properties, businesses, intellectual property, and investments. Kiyosaki highlights that the financially literate understand how to use cash flow to buy more assets, which increases future cash flow. This compounding effect mirrors how monopoly rewards players who strategically acquire properties early, then reinvest the income into more properties and upgrades. Another major theme is the use of leverage, specifically good debt, in monopoly. Players often trade or mortgage properties to acquire better ones. In real life, the rich borrow money to acquire assets that generate cash flow. The middle class typically sees debt as a burden. The rich see it as a tool. This strategic difference explains why people with average incomes can still become wealthy if they learn to use debt intelligently. Kiyosaki then connects this mindset to the cash flow quadrant. People in the employee and self-employed quadrants focus on working harder. People in the B business owner and I investor quadrants focus on building systems and acquiring assets. Monopoly reinforces B and I quadrant thinking. Players win by building a portfolio, not by earning wages. The chapter also explains how financial statements reflect the same logic as the game. The income statement shows how much money an asset generates. The balance sheet shows how many assets a person owns and how those assets are financed. Financially illiterate individuals accumulate liabilities: cars, personal expenses, consumer goods, believing they are assets. Monopoly teaches that only items that generate positive cash flow should be classified as assets. Another important point is that both monopoly and real-world investing require patience and long-term thinking. The rich understand cycles, temporary downturns in the game, or the real economy create opportunities to acquire valuable assets at discounted prices. Kiyosaki concludes that monopoly is more than a game. It is a simplified model of real financial strategy. The rich do not become wealthy by chance. They follow a predictable pattern: acquire assets, increase cash flow, use leverage, study financial statements, and reinvest continuously. This mindset, not income level, determines long-term financial success. Chapter 10 explains a concept that most people never learn in traditional education: phantom income. Robert Kiyosaki uses this chapter to show how the rich legally earn income that is not taxed the same way as traditional wages and, in some cases, not taxed at all. This type of income often does not appear as cash in the traditional sense, yet it increases wealth and reduces tax burden, making it a central part of advanced financial strategy. Kiyosaki begins by contrasting earned income with phantom income. Earned income: wages, salaries. Hourly pay is the most heavily taxed type of income. Individuals in the employee and self-employed quadrants rely almost entirely on this type of income, leaving them exposed to high taxes and limited opportunities for wealth building. Phantom income, however, originates from the B business owner and I investor quadrants, where the tax code provides incentives for creating value in the economy. Phantom income often arises from depreciation, appreciation, and tax incentives that increase an investor's wealth without increasing their tax liability. For example, in real estate investing, a property may generate positive cash flow each month, yet the investor can claim depreciation, which reduces taxable income, even though the property itself may be increasing in market value. This creates a situation where the investor earns money but legally reports less income. Kiyosaki emphasizes that phantom income is not fake money. Instead, it reflects the difference between accounting income and cash flow. Financially literate investors understand how to use the tax code to create financial outcomes that benefit them. Financially illiterate individuals, by contrast, focus only on cash received from wages. Another example Kiyosaki highlights is capital gains through equity growth. When an asset increases in value, such as real estate or a business, the owner gains wealth, even if no cash is exchanged. This increase appears on the balance sheet, not the income statement, because it is unrealized. It is not taxed. Investors can leverage this increased equity to borrow more money and acquire additional assets, creating more cash flow and more phantom income. The chapter also explores how tax regulations reward certain behaviors, such as providing housing, building businesses, or developing energy infrastructure. Investors who participate in these areas receive tax benefits that often produce phantom income. These incentives exist because governments depend on private sector investors to support economic growth. Kiyosaki argues that understanding phantom income requires strong financial literacy, especially the ability to read and interpret financial statements. Investors use the balance sheet to track asset appreciation, the income statement to measure cash flow, and the tax code to determine how much income is taxable. This combination of knowledge allows the rich to continuously reinvest and scale their wealth. The chapter concludes by stating that phantom income is one of the most important advantages of operating in the B and I quadrants. Employees cannot access these benefits because their income is tied to labor, not assets. To escape the cycle of high taxation and limited financial growth, individuals must learn how phantom income works and how to acquire assets that produce it. Chapter 11 focuses on the investor I quadrant, the quadrant Robert Kiyosaki identifies as the highest level of financial intelligence and the primary domain of the rich. The chapter explains what separates true investors from savers, speculators, and employees who occasionally dabble in financial markets. Kiyosaki argues that mastering the I quadrant is essential for achieving long-term financial freedom. He begins by contrasting investors with speculators. Many people who believe they are investing are actually gambling. They buy stocks, mutual funds, or cryptocurrencies without understanding the underlying financial statements or market fundamentals. This behavior is characteristic of financial illiteracy. True investors operate based on knowledge, cash flow analysis, and strategic use of the tax code, not emotion or guesswork. Kiyosaki then connects the I quadrant to the cash flow quadrant framework. Individuals in the E employee and S self-employed quadrants depend on earned income. Individuals in the B business owner quadrant build systems that generate income. Individuals in the I investor quadrant focus on acquiring and controlling assets that produce cash flow, appreciate in value, and provide tax advantages. The I quadrant builds on the skills of the B quadrant. Successful investors often begin by understanding business systems, because owning and analyzing businesses is a cornerstone of advanced investing. A major concept in this chapter is that the I quadrant requires financial literacy at a higher level, including the ability to read and interpret income statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, debt structures, tax incentives. Kiyosaki emphasizes that the investor's primary job is to evaluate the strength of financial statements. Those who cannot read financial statements are forced to rely on advisors, brokers, or fund managers, meaning they remain outsiders to the world of true investing. The chapter also explains how investors legally pay the least in taxes. This is because the tax code rewards investment activity, especially investments that contribute to economic growth. For example, investors can benefit from depreciation, capital gains treatment, 1031 exchanges, accelerated depreciation, tax incentives for real estate, energy, and business development. These advantages dramatically reduce tax liability for those operating in the I quadrant. Employees cannot access these benefits because their income is tied to labor, not investment activity. Kiyosaki highlights the importance of risk management. Investors control risk through education, due diligence, and financial analysis, not by avoiding opportunities. They evaluate deals using numbers, ensuring that cash flow and asset performance support long-term stability. Unlike speculators, they do not rely on market predictions. Another key point is leverage, using debt to amplify returns. Investors use other people's money, banks, lenders, partners, to acquire assets that produce income. When done correctly, leverage multiplies cash flow and accelerates wealth growth. However, this requires advanced financial skills and understanding of debt structures. Kiyosaki concludes that mastery of the I quadrant is the path to true wealth. It requires financial literacy, strategic thinking, and the ability to analyze financial statements. Those who develop these skills can build long-term wealth and reduce dependence on earned income, while those who remain in the E and S quadrants stay vulnerable to taxes and economic cycles. Chapter 12 focuses on the importance of having a financial plan B, a backup strategy for economic downturns, job loss, market crashes, and systemic shifts. Robert Kiyosaki argues that most people rely on a single financial plan, typically built around earned income, savings, and government-supported retirement programs. This dependence leaves them vulnerable when economic conditions change. In contrast, the rich design multiple income streams, structural protections, and diversified asset bases to ensure resilience. Kiyosaki begins by emphasizing that the traditional plan, go to school, get a job, save money, buy a house, and invest in a 401k, was never designed to create wealth. It was created to produce dependable workers and contributors to government-funded retirement systems. The problem, he argues, is that this model collapses under inflation, increasing taxes, and technological disruption. Anyone relying solely on earned income or a single retirement vehicle faces significant risk. A central idea in this chapter is economic fragility. Employees and self-employed individuals operate with fragile financial structures because their income depends on their labor. If their job disappears, their income stops. Their savings, exposed to inflation, lose value. Their retirement funds fluctuate with the market. Without financial education, they lack the tools to adjust quickly. The rich design Plan B structures that remain stable regardless of economic conditions. These include rental real estate producing steady cash flow, businesses with systems that operate without the owner, investments that benefit from inflation, income streams protected by tax incentives, access to credit lines for opportunities during downturns. Kiyosaki stresses that the essence of Plan B is control. Employees have little control over taxes, corporate decisions, market volatility, or economic policy. Investors and business owners position themselves to control cash flow, expenses, and leverage. Control reduces financial vulnerability. The chapter also examines government dependence. Many people rely on Social Security, Medicare, pensions, or subsidized programs. Kiyosaki argues that these systems are financially strained and cannot guarantee long-term support. Relying on them is not a plan, it is a hope. The rich, by contrast, operate independently of government assistance by building assets and legal structures that allow them to manage their own financial future. A key concept in the chapter is stress testing personal finances. The rich evaluate their financial statements based on questions such as, can this asset survive a downturn? How long can I operate with no earned income? Where is my cash flow vulnerable? Do I have liquidity for emergencies or opportunities? Financially literate individuals use these questions to strengthen weak areas and build backup systems. Kiyosaki concludes by stating that a real Plan B is not insurance, savings, or hope. It is financial education applied through assets. To protect themselves, individuals must shift from dependence on earned income to reliance on business and investment income. Only then can they create a financial structure that withstands economic cycles and unexpected disruptions. Chapter 13 focuses on an idea central to Robert Kiyosaki's mission. Poverty persists because financial education is missing from the school system, not because people lack intelligence or motivation. In this chapter, Kiyosaki shifts from personal wealth-building principles to a broader societal impact, arguing that genuine financial education taught peer-to-peer can break cycles of poverty. Across generations, Kiyosaki begins by stating that traditional education teaches academic and professional skills, but fails to teach the fundamentals of money, how it works, how to manage it, and how to make it grow. As a result, students graduate without the ability to read financial statements, understand taxes, or use debt productively. This lack of financial literacy creates systemic vulnerability. People enter adulthood dependent on jobs, dependent on government programs, and unaware of how wealth is actually created. A central theme in this chapter is the concept of students teaching students. Kiyosaki believes financial education spreads most effectively when individuals who have learned financial skills teach others directly, rather than relying on institutions that avoid real financial topics. Schools often hesitate to teach financial literacy because it challenges the traditional go-to-school, get-a-job narrative. For Kiyosaki, peer-led financial education is the only scalable model capable of addressing global financial inequality. The chapter introduces the idea that poverty is often a lack of cash flow understanding, not simply a lack of income. People in poverty typically operate in the employee and as self-employed quadrants, where income is inconsistent, highly taxed, and dependent on labor. By teaching individuals how to recognize assets, build small-scale cash flow systems, and use basic financial statements, it becomes possible to shift them toward the B and I quadrants where wealth can grow, even without high income. Kiyosaki highlights several examples from his global financial education initiatives, where young people learn investing principles, business fundamentals, and financial statement thinking. Once students understand these skills, they naturally begin sharing them with peers and family members. This peer-driven model reduces dependency on centralized institutions and accelerates financial literacy in underserved communities. Another key point in Chapter 13 is that poverty solutions fail when they rely only on charity, government policy, or traditional economic interventions. These approaches address symptoms, not causes. Handouts, subsidies, and social programs can provide short-term relief, but do not create financial capability. Kiyosaki argues that poverty ends when individuals learn how to control their own financial destiny through assets, cash flow, and literacy. He also emphasizes the importance of mindset. Many people internalize beliefs that wealth is unattainable or restricted to a select few. Peer-led financial education helps dismantle those beliefs, because students see people like themselves applying financial concepts successfully. The chapter concludes by asserting that ending poverty is not about earning more. It is about teaching financial systems, not job skills. When individuals learn how assets, liabilities, taxes, and cash flow truly work, they gain the ability to build wealth regardless of background or starting position. Students teaching students is Kiyosaki's model for spreading this knowledge globally. Chapter 14 explains one of Robert Kiyosaki's most counterintuitive lessons. The rich can use luxury items like a Porsche not as expenses, but as tools to acquire assets and increase wealth. The chapter is not about buying expensive cars for status. Instead, it demonstrates how tax laws, corporate structures, and investment strategies can turn what appears to be a liability into a wealth-building opportunity. Kiyosaki begins by emphasizing the difference between how financially literate and financially illiterate people make purchases. Most individuals buy consumer goods using earned income, which is taxed at the highest rates. This means they pay full price for both the item and the tax is tied to their income source. When they buy a car, it becomes a pure liability. It costs money, depreciates, and generates no financial return. The rich follow a different process. Kiyosaki explains that they rarely purchase luxury items directly with earned income. Instead, they acquire assets such as real estate, businesses, or investments that produce cash flow. That cash flow is then used to pay for the luxury item. The key principle is that assets pay for liabilities, not personal labor. The chapter also explores how corporate structures affect purchasing decisions. Business owners can legally classify certain expenses such as vehicles, travel, and equipment as business deductions if they are used for business purposes. This reduces taxable income. When executed within legal boundaries, a vehicle may partially or fully qualify as a deductible business expense. This shifts the effective cost dramatically in comparison to buying the same car with personal after-tax dollars. Kiyosaki highlights the role of depreciation, a concept often misunderstood by the middle class. Vehicles used for business purposes can generate depreciation deductions. Even though the car may lose value, the owner receives a tax benefit. This benefit can offset the cost of the car or reduce tax liabilities created by other income streams. In this scenario, the car is no longer just a liability, it becomes part of a strategy that increases net wealth. A major point in Chapter 14 is the importance of financial sequencing. Financially illiterate individuals buy liabilities first and hope to accumulate assets later. The rich acquire assets first, then let the assets pay for their lifestyle. This order of operations determines whether liabilities drain wealth or are funded by cash flow systems. Kiyosaki also emphasizes risk control. He makes it clear that buying luxury items does not make someone rich. The underlying system, cash flowing assets, legal structures, and tax strategy is what creates wealth. The Porsche example simply illustrates how financially literate individuals use the rules of money differently. The chapter concludes with the idea that the real skill is not in owning luxury goods, but in understanding how financial statements, tax incentives, and business structures work together. When these elements align, even a liability can be integrated into a wealth-building process. The poor and middle class see a car as a cost. The rich see it as a byproduct of a functioning financial system. Why the rich are getting richer delivers a direct message. The financial gap continues to widen because the rules of money have changed, but most people are still playing by old rules. Throughout the book, Robert Kiyosaki explains that wealth is not a result of higher income, luck, or talent, but a result of financial education, specifically the kind that focuses on cash flow, debt, taxes, and asset ownership. The book reinforces that schools prepare people to become workers, not investors. As a result, the majority of adults depend on earned income, pay the highest taxes, save money in a system designed to devalue savings, and attempt to retire through government-controlled plans. These strategies keep most people in the employee and self-employed quadrants where time, labor, and taxes limit financial growth. Kiyosaki breaks down how the rich operate in the B business owner and I investor quadrants. They use systems, corporate structures, and financial statements to acquire assets that produce cash flow. They leverage good debt to accelerate growth, use tax incentives to reduce liability, and rely on financial literacy, not job security, to build long-term wealth. Concepts like depreciation, phantom income, and cash flow leverage are examples of tools the rich use to expand wealth legally and efficiently. Another core theme is the power of market cycles. While the average person fears downturns, the rich prepare for them. Crashes become strategic buying opportunities because wealth is built by acquiring undervalued assets, not by working harder. The book also makes a broader argument. Poverty persists due to a lack of financial education, not a lack of government support. Kiyosaki advocates for peer-to-peer learning, students teaching students, as the only scalable way to spread real financial knowledge globally. In essence, the book teaches that becoming wealthy requires understanding financial statements, using debt strategically, reducing taxes legally, acquiring cash-flowing assets, learning continuously, and shifting from earned income to business and investment income. The people who master these skills move to the right side of the cash flow quadrant, where money works for them, not the other way around. If this breakdown helped you understand how the rich actually build wealth, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into financial education. Drop a comment below. Which concept from this book do you want to apply first? Assets, taxes, debt, or cash flow? And if you want more summaries of books by Robert Kiyosaki, Napoleon Hill, Benjamin Graham, or Morgan Housel, let me know. I'll cover whichever one you want next. Your financial education starts here. Let's keep building.